Hello and happy April. I can't believe I'm saying that. I feel like now is the most exciting time of the year, but I also think I said that a few months back, just when things were starting to emerge and bulbs were starting to bloom. So I guess I don't know when is the most exciting time of the year, but I am excited about now too. If you're new here, my name is Michelle. I garden in Atlanta, Georgia. That's a zone 7B or 8A, and I'm on your pretty typical suburban lot. I'm right under a quarter of an acre, and I try to make the most of it and plant all the beautiful things and all the edible things for my family. And I share all of that here with you on YouTube and on my social media accounts as Gardens and Chickens. I also keep chickens, and I talk about them mostly in the winter because there's just so many great plants to talk about right now. I can't balance it. So today I'm going to be sharing the 3 things I do this time of the year in case your to-do list isn't long enough. You can add these onto your list. So first up, I want to talk about your edible veggie garden. If you have a kitchen garden, now is the time to be looking ahead at the forecast and checking your last frost date. Our last frost date is about April 15th, and about 2 weeks before your last frost date, what you're going to want to do is start hardening off your seedlings. What does that mean? So hardening off means that if you grew seedlings indoors and they're used to UV fluorescent light, we're going to slowly acclimate them to sunlight so that when they go into the garden, they don't burn and fry. Why would they burn and fry their plants? It's because when they're indoors, their cell walls are actually thinner and aren't protecting them from the UV light because they haven't been exposed to that UV light. What you want to do is put them in a shady spot and then move them into the sunlight for maybe only an hour and a half the first day. Then the next day, 2 hours. The next day, 3 hours, the next day 4. You're gonna keep extending the amount of time they're in direct sun until they're in direct sun all day, and that's when they're ready to be planted in the garden. Now, when do you plant? Admittedly, I will risk it a little bit because I am so sick of watering seedlings. I'm just done babying them. They've been under my care since about early February, and now it's time for them to figure it out in the garden. So I went ahead and planted mine when my 10-day forecast looked clear on April 5th. So they're actually in the ground now and doing their thing. So when I plant my veggie garden, I like to add fertilizer to the planting hole, and I also like to plant in a rich compost. If your soil is great and you amended it earlier, you're in a good spot. But I forgot to amend my soil earlier, so what I'm gonna do is create a very nice wide planting hole, put in my plant, fill with compost, and then also mound compost on top for plants that like to be buried deep like tomatoes. So that takes care of the veggie garden for April. This is the month in Atlanta where we get things in the ground. So we start with hardening them off for that period so that they get into the ground and they don't scorch when they're there, and they just start thriving and growing immediately. Now let's switch gears and talk about the landscape. What am I doing in the garden? April is an amazing time to plant. If you are looking at an area that's looking a little bit sparse, if you're dreaming of adding in a new garden bed, now is an excellent time to get that going. I love to add in garden beds by sheet mulching. I talk about sheet mulching all the time on my channel, and that is just because it is so easy. Right now in my garden, I have mostly lawn, and I am adding to it little by little by adding in new beds or extending old beds as I have the funds to do so. Because as you know, adding to the garden can get expensive, so it's something that I personally save for, and as I have the funds to do so, I treat myself, I create a new bed, I extend an old bed. Slowly by surely, I'm adding to the garden to create that vision, but I don't have the funds right now to drop all of that on the garden and create my dream garden today, and that's okay, because you know why? It's actually easier to maintain this way in the summer. Because come summertime, in times of drought, you're going to need to water all of those new plants that you're putting into the ground right now, and be extra diligent about it because they're not quite established, so they don't have that drought resistance that the rest of your garden has. So if you went and did an entire backyard transformation all in one season, you're going to need to water that entire backyard constantly in the summer. But if you are adding to your garden little by little, you could focus watering in those areas that you added to. And sure, you're gonna have to water the rest of your garden, but not as much. You're really making it easier on yourself and easier on your budget. So I highly recommend looking at your garden. If there's an area that you want to add to, or if there's something that you've been dreaming of building out, now is an excellent time to plant it. Like being outside this time of year, your plants like being planted. When the temperatures are mild like this, your plants that you're putting in the ground are less likely to kind of go into transplant shock because they're not trying to survive in extreme weather while also trying to establish. They're able to focus on establishing and getting into their new spot and thriving later when the temperatures go crazy. The last thing that I try to do this time of year is actually something that I tried not to do. That is pruning. I've done a video kind of like this before where I showed all the things that I'm pruning. I think this was back in February. Right now is when I put the scissors away and I'm waiting for things to fully wake up before I prune them. Things like hydrangeas this year, tea olives, gardenias, and other shrubs that are kind of on the border got really zapped when we had that freeze-mageddon in December. Trying really hard not to touch them until later this month. So likely at the end of the month, anything that hasn't leafed out will get whacked back. I will pronounce it dead. Until then, I'm leaving it and giving it a chance to leaf out. I'm looking and I'm starting to see tea olives rebound. I'm starting to see gardenias rebound. So I don't think all hope is lost quite yet. I am consciously reminding myself not to prune right now and to wait. Another thing you might want to prune this time of year, especially when you get all that brand new green foliage, is flowering shrubs. So azaleas, gardenias, hydrangeas, put your pruners away. So in general, when I'm trying to decide if it's time to prune a shrub or not, is whether or not it has just flowered. So the rule of thumb is once a shrub flowers, that's when you prune. Even if it's looking shaggy right now, if you trim it, it will not flower. You are cutting off your flower buds and destroying your show for the season. So just wait a little bit. Things might be looking shaggy, but that's just how the garden looks. You don't have to go and prune right now. If you wait just a minute, let it flower, enjoy the flowers, then prune, you'll be in a much better spot. This is also the same time when you fertilize. So that's kind of my rule of thumb. When something is done flowering, I go ahead, I will shape it if it needs shaping. I will fertilize it for next year's flower buds. That's the plant's reset period. So those are the two rules of thumbs that I use to maintain my landscape. I don't Google every single thing that I have in terms of care instructions. It pretty much is a general rule of thumb that you can use for your landscape. One exception to fertilization are your potted plants and your roses. If you have something potted, you're going to have to feed it regularly. I make an alert in my phone so that I have a reminder that it's the time to feed XYZ. So for citrus, I feed monthly. My annual containers, I feed every other week. My roses, I feed monthly. I just go ahead and set that up in my phone so that I'm reminded and I don't have to remember. But other than that, that general rule of thumb will serve you well. Hopefully I didn't add too much to your to-do list. The garden is really a place that I love being in, and I feel like once you get into a routine, it's not that much work. These are really garden tasks that you can do like with your morning cup of coffee as you're walking around, and not something that you have to stress about. It should really only take you 10 to 15 minutes for every kind of little thing that you might need to do. Other thing that I forgot to mention, but it's very important this time of year, it's to go out and enjoy your garden. Just go do a garden walk, see what's blooming, see what's growing. You'll be able to catch diseases this way if you see them, or pests if you see them. It's just the best way to both enjoy your garden and to be proactive about your garden is to just get out there and see what's happening. I hope that was helpful. I hope you're enjoying your garden this time of year, and I will see you in the next video.